Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dames and here, manene namanenekazi. My name is Nokuthula Msimang, a researcher and writer based at the University of Pretoria's Humanities Department and Future Africa Institute. I am pleased to welcome you to our exciting webinar this morning, hosted by the Pendoring Indigenous Language Awards, the Indigenous Language Action Forum, ILAF, the Pan-South African Language Board, PanSALB, Fin24 and Hollard. Our webinar is titled, Language, a Strategic Resource. Our historic constitution has enshrined at its core the respect and valuing of multilingualism. I quote, "Every person shall be entitled to enjoy, practice, profess, maintain, and promote any culture, language, tradition, or religion subject to the terms of this Constitution and further subject to the condition that the rights protected by this article do not impinge upon the rights of others or the national interest." Of course, our beloved father of our nation, Tatu Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela, has famously said, if you want to talk to somebody's heart, talk to them in their language. How are we as business and the public sector speaking to South Africans? Are we using language as a strategic resource? In a multilingual environment, English only is not a solution, but an expensive shortcoming. In a multilingual environment, language is not a cost, but a valuable corporate resource. With that, I would like to introduce our esteemed panel this morning. They represent business, the public sector, and academia. So first, Mr. Julius Dantile, the executive head of PanSALB, will open the webinar for us, followed by Professor Frieda Steurs, who is the head of the Dutch Language Institute, followed by Mr. Enver Groenewald, Group CEO, Ogilvy and Mobile Marketing Association SA 2021 Board Chair. And then we will have Ms. Ntjantja, who is a Hollard trustee and former chief executive responsible for the early childhood development portfolio within the Hollard Foundation Trust. And then Prof of African Language Studies at UWC, Russell Kashula, will give us the closing remarks. So our webinar will be an hour long. So each of our panelists will speak for about 8 minutes each. We will then have a 20-minute discussion thereafter. You can send in your questions. And then we will close. So at this moment, I would like to hand over to Mr. Julius Dantile, the executive head of PanSALB. Mr. Dantile, welcome, and over to you, sir.
Molweni nonke botani goeiemôre mense dumelang bageso I will then start by I won't say it's a disclaimer, but by a note of saying that you are all welcome into this discussion, but my welcoming is already starting after my greetings in English, which then talks to the issues of platforms like these, where we discuss about indigenous languages using another language. It talks about those interactive elements that we have to take into consideration. I trust that through the process of planning of this webinar, there was an inclusion of the sign language to indicate that we take care of, also take into consideration people of deaf community. My welcome is just to not unpack the topic itself. I just want to put a certain simple 2 or 3 questions that I think the panel would then be able to go through them as they are talking about this topic, language, a strategic resource. Language is a strategic resource in various aspects and levels. As I think the introduction that was made by Dr. Nokuthula Msimang, Mazibuko Msimang, that language is mostly viewed, particularly in the context of South Africa, is mostly viewed as a cost, and which then comes to a point to say it is a problem. And immediately then you are resolving a problem. Your solutions towards a problem are about resolving the problem. They are not about creating opportunities for a multilingualism to flourish. As Pan-South African Language Board, our responsibility is not to deal with the problem, is to deal with issues of how we can make and maintain and sustain the furtherance of multilingualism. That is the first level and approach that we have taken. We don't want to deal with language as a problem. We want to deal with the issue of multilingualism and language as an opportunity. Opportunity in various ways. Opportunity at a transformative level. We need language to play a role in transformation, and transformation across the board in the public service, transformation in private sector, transformation in people's life. And once we have, while we are dealing with that, that would lead to an outcome of redress, which we know where does this country come from in terms of issues of redress, use of languages for exploitation, use of language for domination, use of language for divide and rule. We know the system that this country comes from. So we need to redress that particular and transform that particular history. It is our history. We have to take all what is good around it regarding the language and utilize language for transformation. That is the first level that I would like us, when we debate around language as a strategic resource, how do we link that resource element into the issues of transformation in our society? The second level that we have to get into is the level of use language as an economic resource. On the issue of economic resource, how do we allow each language to provide public value for the speakers of that particular language? Public value, and allow these particular speech communities to have economic value, derive economic value from using their own languages. And in South Africa, I think we are battling from understanding that strategic element, that kind of strategic thinking in terms of saying, how do we use indigenous languages to provide issues of economic empowerment. There are various methodologies. I think through this debate here, those are going to come true. The third element that I would welcome you with to say, I would want to see amongst our debate discussion here, element of language used as a strategic resource in the political life of South Africans. Fortunately, this comes around the time of election campaigns, particularly for the cold phase of government, local government elections. And we see politicians, your councillors, your senior politicians canvassing across the board, talking to people as much as they can in their languages because they want votes. And after that, there is a first element that has to be undertaken by the municipalities. Once the council is established, the process of integrated development plan. And immediately, we want to observe whether the same councillors who are speaking to people in their languages, in their communities, convincing them to vote for them, would then come back to them speaking their languages again. And that is where some of these issues comes in. And when I say language becomes a strategic resource when it has a political life and a political clout. So when I welcome you from all the domains that have been mentioned, be it business, academia, or a public service, we are saying as PanSALB, let's then discuss these issues and then put up certain advice and recommendations for our stakeholders, particularly those who are supposed to be implementing and creating these opportunities for people to utilize their own language in their public life. There are issues that have to be dealt with in terms of our constitutional design. That is the fourth level that I'm talking about. And constitutional design and also legislative architect that come in a lot when these issues are taken either to court or even are considered by structures and institutions like us, PanSALB African Language Board. Certain limitations that are making this strategic resource not be able to be utilized for benefits of all, particularly the poor. And that is where the critical issue is. These include clauses, escape clauses, like practical, what's that, reasonable, practicable, where it says in consideration of expense. The question is, which kind of expense is it? I like Dr. Neville Alexandra, the late Dr. Neville Alexandra. He says we always put the issue of the cost only when it comes to the finances, but we forget the issue of the cost that is created by the social ills that are emanating from people not being able to access information in their own languages. And those social ills, you can see them in terms of our education sector, our dropout levels, and our cognitive levels. And then how then are we saying that language is a cost and multilingualism is costly? It is costly whether we do it and promote it. It is costly even if we are not promoting it, because it costs certain individuals and those who cannot access the information in their own languages. Therefore, out of the 4 levels that I've put up, I am expecting out of this debate discussions talking to that particular approach of how do we use language as a resource, not language as a cost element, and how then in the ultimate ensure nation building, social cohesion, but those within diversity. How do you promote diversity and issues of inclusivity? These are the concepts that I would want to hear from our panelists around this particular issue, language as a resource, as a strategic resource. I know that a business in South Africa, there is a, which I call a misnomer, that business is done in English. It is lingua franca, but I always say, go to the mines. You will not hear English. Go to the stores where the actual economic transactions are taking place. Then you will not hear English. You will hear people communicating and transversing and translanguaging, code switching between languages. For instance, in Pretoria, we use different languages when we are transacting and getting to a taxi, which is a multi-billion industry. You rather not speak English, speak your own language, people would understand you. So multilingualism is practical down there. It is only in the higher echelons of the business where then you find English. In the offices, where then you find English mainly. And even there, businesses must take that into consideration to say people should be able to communicate in their own languages and use language as a strategic resource. And some of the businesses are utilizing that effectively and efficiently. Thank you, Doctor. I think you want your space.
Mr. Ntjantja, thank you so much for that wonderful welcome address, where you really, quite powerfully just told us about how, language can transform. Obviously, it's an economic strategic resource, the political power of language, and the very important fact that it is indeed very costly to not use multilingualism as a resource. So thank you very much for that. I will then now introduce briefly Professor Frieda Steurs, who is the head of the Dutch Language Institute. Professor Steurs is a Dutch philologist, linguist, and neurolinguist. She works in the fields of terminology, language technology, specialized translation, and multilingual document management. Some of her recent projects include healthcare without communication, the language gap, an interdisciplinary approach to reducing communication barriers in HIV, tuberculosis, and diabetes treatment in South Africa, funded by the Flemish Inter-University Council. Her recent book and paper, Language is Business, the challenges of a single digital market in a multilingual society, will form part at the basis of her talk during our webinar. Over to Professor Steurs.
Let me first introduce myself. My name is Frieda Steurs. I'm the head of the Dutch Language Institute in Leiden, an institute that works for language and linguistic applications for the Dutch language, both in Flanders, the Netherlands, and Suriname. At the same time, I'm a full professor at University of Leuven in the field of terminology management and language technology. So I have been the dean of my faculty in translation and interpreting for many years. And I saw all these motivated students studying languages, at least 3 languages, sometimes even 4, and working their way into the community, into business, into language applications, becoming translators, interpreters, localization managers, and so on. But what I also saw is that the society is not really aware of the impact of linguistics in society and the importance of multilingualism and a good linguistic policy. And so that's why I wrote a book. It's written in Dutch, Taal is Business. And I wrote one article in English about this book, about the content, but in the near future, I hope to publish more on this in English. So my statement for today is about the power of languages. In a multilingual environment, both in Europe, in Africa, everywhere in the world, language is not a cost, but it is a valuable corporate resource. And my second statement is that the strategic deployment of language inside and outside companies provides competitive edge to the business life. I give the example here of Antwerp, where I live in Flanders, a large city, and it is the second largest port in Europe. And every city in Europe wants to attract young people, wants to make it attractive for young people to come and live there, to come and work there. So such a city wants to measure its attractiveness by using 4 fields: economy, the labor market, knowledge economy, and sustainability. If we see here, if we use all these markets and the economic activity in Antwerp, but this also applies to other large cities, then we can see if we want economic activity and economic expansion, we need to focus on languages. Again, the example of Antwerp, which can then be extrapolated to every other city. We have shipping documents, customs documents, textile production, food industry, medical production, IT applications, the building industry, everything that is shipped or traded has a lot of multilingual information that is needed, and that is absolutely obligatory for these products to be able to travel and to be traded. We think about the Belgian chocolates. If we want to export this famous product, then we need instructions and also the list of ingredients in all kinds of languages for every possible export market and the necessary shipping documents. Now, interestingly enough, a number of studies have been conducted over the last years on what happens when there is a lack of multilingualism, when we are dealing with a society where too many people are monolingual. And there was this ILAF study, you can find the reference at the bottom of the slide. It was a study especially conducted in France on what happens when you have a lack of linguistic competence. So 11% of a test group of 2,000 small to medium-sized companies, they admitted they had lost contracts due to a lack of language skills. And many of them, almost half of these companies, they wanted to explore new markets. But that means that you need a language strategy in place. If you want to explore other markets, you have to adapt to the locale, to the local customs and to the languages involved. And many agreed that multilingualism is an extra asset. So again, in monolingual countries such as the UK and also France, this is a huge problem here in Europe, where they lose contracts and possible income due to monolingualism. What kind of measurements can we take? We then recruit multilingual employees, offer language courses to advance multilingualism, and multilingual company meetings can be held in different business languages. This will support the fact that people within a company use several languages. Of course, a multilingual documentation system and a terminology list, this is the backbone of your international or your internal knowledge management. And of course, the intranet of a company can be made multilingual to address employees in different parts of the country or different parts in the world. The external website should be written in clear language and of course in the language of the customer. So this triggers the fact that many companies have to adapt their websites to different local markets, different languages and different cultures. You can see here the rise in e-commerce, but it all means multilingual websites because there has been research done. Customers want to be addressed in their own language. They feel it's safer to consume and to buy by clicking a website in their own language. Final example then is Caterpillar. You might recognize the logo. It's a huge American company. And the activity here is the design and construction of heavy machinery for civil engineering and mining. And they work worldwide. They have divisions in more than 200 countries all over the world. And 60% of their turnover is made abroad, so not in the United States. So they both work in South America, in Africa, in Europe, everywhere in the world. Now, in the 80s, they really believed that everybody should use English. It was a monolingual culture. They said, we are going to create a Caterpillar fundamental English, basic, highly simplified English. All technicians everywhere in the world, whether they were in Greece, in South America, whether they were in China or somewhere in Africa, everybody had to use this elementary English. This was the English only strategy. And it was logic. In the 80s of last century, it referred to a linguistic model called Basic English, restricted to 850 words, where only 100 words denote action, so verbs, 600 words denoting objects, and 150 words denoting quality, so the adjectives. So they believed that really everybody could speak English like that, and that was enough. Now this was completely, it went completely wrong, and Caterpillar switched from a monolingual to a multilingual approach. They created a very rich technical English, 70,000 words, but with unambiguous terminology for their company, one term, one concept, clear syntax. And then this technical English was translated into Chinese, German, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. And it's really very, very important that this is done because of safety regulations. It's really, they have to be very careful that technicians all over the world understand the instructions properly. So this is a good example to see how multilingualism for such a huge American company is really paramount. My conclusion then for this session is that multilingual communication is a valuable and absolutely necessary corporate resource. And both public services and companies need to develop a language strategy to answer the needs of a multilingual society. So this is my contribution to this very interesting discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you, Prof. Steurs, for that really insightful talk. You know, all those examples that you gave us showing that it makes a difference to your bottom line, really, you know, whether you're using one language or many languages. So with that, I would like to move on to Mr. Enver Groenewald, who is the Group CEO Ogilvy and Mobile Marketing Association SA 2021 Board Chair, and he is an experienced management professional with a leadership focus on business strategy, effectiveness and efficiency, and revenue growth and optimization. Groenewald has industry experience across FMCG, financial services, telecoms, retail, brand marketing, and media, and has previously held board, executive and non-executive directorships and senior management roles within listed and non-listed commercial entities and NPOs. He is a keen advocate of progressive business models that deliver profitability through innovation, social consciousness, purpose, and people. Groenewald's mantra is think deep, work smart, create value. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and appreciate the invitations. In fact, great honor to be part of such an august panel. I'm going to perhaps start my presentation, and I don't have any slides, so I'll just share my perspectives. I'll start off by saying that the generally accepted approach is that English is the language of business. And I think that that's a very simplistic and convenient way of understanding this concept. I, in fact, disagree with that. I think that English is the language between businesses. When one looks at businesses as institutions and as monolithic entities, that does not infer that English should be the language, the primary language of business between businesses and individuals as consumers or employees. And I think that that's very important in terms of our business, Ogilvy, which is South Africa's largest advertising communications group, because our stock in trade is simply to create persuasive arguments for our clients to ensure that consumers and customers and society chooses their products and brands over those of their competitors. Now, if we proceed from the understanding that English is the language of business between businesses, but not necessarily the language of business between businesses and consumers or customers, then one must understand very clearly that for us to create these very persuasive arguments for our clients, customers, and consumers to choose their products and services over those of the others, we have to appeal very strongly to those consumers' emotions, to their intellect, and to the need for them to feel respected and communicated with in a manner that defers to their identity and their sense of culture. You cannot do this as a business if you are not bringing to bear the power and the impact of employees within your business who represent multilingualism. Because without that, you are forced into a situation where you can only practice this very simplistic and shallow perspective of English being the language of business. So what we have to do as a business, and not only our business, but many, many other businesses, is that we have to adopt, promote, and celebrate this philosophy and this approach, and I think this value system of multilingualism within organizations. I like to call it a language is diversity and inclusivity in practice. So when organizations talk about diversity and inclusivity, and we focus particularly only on issues of race and gender, sexual orientation, ability, so on and so forth, I very often find that the issue of language is not something that is brought to the fore when organizations talk about diversity and inclusivity. And if we don't do that, then I think we miss a significant opportunity to give true and full expression to this need to bring about diversity, full diversity and inclusion within organizations in pursuit of the transformation agenda that organizations need to bring to the fore. I think language from a business perspective, to echo the previous speaker, Professor Steurs, is very much a source of sustainable competitive advantage for businesses if they choose to recognize it as such. Therefore, language cannot be a cost. For us to see it as a cost only, I think, is to denude the import of language from a diversity, inclusivity, and business performance perspective of its importance. Therefore, I think language as from a business perspective should not be seen as a cost, but as a vital social and business investment that needs to be brought to the fore and given strength to it every step of the way. Thank you so much, Chair, for the opportunity to share my perspectives, and thank you to the participants for their time and attention.
Enver, Groenewald, thank you so much for that, really highlighting the importance of transformation and how it actually impacts your bottom line, right? Including more people in the economy and ensuring that we all benefit, a win-win situation. Thank you very much for that. I will now move on to Ntjantja, Hollard trustee, and who is a former CEO of the Hollard Foundation. And she has been committed to enabling public-private partnerships to deliver early childhood development and system change Prior to her work with the foundation, Ntjantja worked as a development consultant focusing on women and children in local government and served as a director at the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund and was head of the social policy unit at UNICEF, DDG at social development at the national government. She views the issue of language as a permanently current issue in the journey of system change with communities and government. Over to you, Ntjantja Ned.
I'm Ntjantja Ned. I do many things. One of them is being a trustee of the Hollard Foundation Trust. I used to be a CEO. I stepped down from that full-time job some 5 years ago, but I remain a trustee. So I'm working in the early childhood development sector. And so I remain actively involved, representing the Hollard Foundation Trust, working with government on all aspects that pertain to universal access to early childhood development and to quality, and not leaving any child behind, irrespective of where they are born and where they are grown up. I've got 3 events that I want to quote to you about how language affects people. I think even I applied for my nephew in 1996 to go to Grey College in the Free State. Of course, he was going to do primary school there. And so I brought him to school after some hassles, and then a teacher was going to be a grade 1 teacher, very lovely lady, talks to him. And of course, my nephew didn't speak English or African, spoke Sotho perfectly. And the teacher said, "Oh, but your son doesn't speak English." It's like, surprise. I said, "That's why he's here. He's coming to learn English. But he speaks perfect Sotho. Can you try that and see whether he won't understand you?" And you could see that the teacher did not really, she was taken aback by that response. And so there was an expectation that he should come to school speaking English already. How can he do that? He's a black boy, he's a Sotho, he's a Mosotho. Speaks Sotho, he was absolutely fluent. So that's one indicator that, you know, your child will be left behind, because every time, and first day, he's told what he can't do. So the appreciation of what he brings is actually left out. If I wasn't there to respond to that, possibly things happen in class, but I would already told the teacher that he tries Sotho, and every time he doesn't understand, speak to him in Sotho and you'll see he understands. So that's the power or the disadvantage of unequal languages. And the second incident was really quite a sad one for me, because we were driving from the airport. All of these 3 incidents are all from the Free State for some funny reason. It was just around 6:30 p.m. And ahead of us, I was driving with my colleague, my ex-colleague then, Professor Hausen. And an accident happened right in front of us. And this guy was stuck in the driver's seat. And at the back seat was a 4-year-old little girl. They were African speaking. So Craig, of course, being a doctor, and he went front to this man, and my nature being a mother person, I went for the child. So I picked this child up and I tried to talk to the child in English. The child did not understand. And that was the first time I actually felt really bad that I couldn't speak Afrikaans. Because that child needed a mother. She needed somebody to just to hold her back. See, that really still just disturbed me the heck. I could speak Afrikaans because I knew Afrikaans from high school, from primary school. We were forced to learn Afrikaans. So actually I did understand English, but the last day I wrote it at school, in matric, that's the day I decided never to speak it until that day. And I felt really bad that I couldn't be a parent to that child, that I could. So, and that's again, this whole thing of, and I spoke in English, poor me, and the child did not understand. And I don't expect that child to understand English because she was African speaking. So I have no understanding of how the child felt, but she was comforted one way or the other, I think, because I was really holding her close to me and talking whatever I was saying in English, and Sesotho actually, I think I was even speaking Sesotho, but because that's the natural nature in me, in my own language. I can't nurture anybody in another language. So the third incident, again on the language thing, I was practicing as a social worker, and I worked in a hospital. We're in a mental health psychiatric ward, and the doctor, the psychologist, was talking to a mentally ill man, and there was a young nurse who was a white doctor and a black nurse, a youngish girl, and this man who was Xhosa speaking. So apparently this man was asking for release to go home from the hospital. And the doctor wanted to know why he wants to go home. And he said it in Xhosa. He said, "Diyochithikazi." This in direct translation says, "I'm going to spill blood." And this nurse translated it exactly like I just did. And in the loose English, like he wants to go and spill blood. Now, this is a man who's got psychiatric problems, talking about going to spill blood. And you know what he was actually asking for? He wanted to go have a ceremony with his ancestors, where they've got to slaughter either a goat or a sheep to pray to the ancestors. That's what that expression meant. So you can imagine then what the doctor did. Saying, this guy is crazy, and he actually is telling me that he's going to spill blood. I guess they increased his prescription to numb him down. Of course, he was getting angry because the doctor doesn't want to release him to go and do his cleansing ceremony. So this for me is the issue about language. It's not me speaking to you. It's me expressing who I am. It's me expressing my culture. And it's me being an equal citizen, speaking a language that is official in this country.
Thank you for that contribution, Ntjantja, Ned. Really talking about how expensive it can get in terms of education, in terms of health, when we are really insisting on monolingualism. And I think that is something that all of our panelists, have really emphasized on, to say multilingualism actually, yes, it includes all of us. And of course, we've got the human rights aspect of the transformation imperative to include everybody, that we are all equal in the Constitution. But also that, if you speak many languages, you are able to do trade, as Professor Steurs really rightly pointed out, that, some industries, whether you are in the textile industry, the food industry, for goods to be able to move, around the globe, we need to be speaking each other's languages and to be understanding each other. And of course, these days, technologies come to the party and are able to assist us. So with that, I am going to just open up the discussion and see if there are any questions. And perhaps if I could just ask Professor Steurs to just come online and come on board and elaborate. Now, I've seen Ntjantja has got her hand up. Ntjantja has got her hand up. I will come back to you, Ntjantja. Professor Steurs, if you could just please kindly elaborate, on some more examples around, what you've touched on in your presentation to say, look, goods moving around needs us to be multilingual. I mean, it seems really like common sense, but you can't really do trade if you are monolingual, can you?
Yes, that's very true. And of course, I did my research looking around in Europe, because Europe is a continent it's quite small, but has a very active trade all over the world. And we have tiny, tiny countries compared to countries in Africa or countries in the large countries in South America and so on. So we have a lot of smaller languages. And yet all the research being done in Europe proves that customers really only feel safe when they are addressed in their own language. And Europe is taking the lead in that, because the European Parliament voted for a very important regulation that says that every company has to, if they want to launch a product in a market, they are obliged to add manuals and guidelines in the official languages. And nowadays we are even moving into a new step forward into multilingualism, because not only the official languages of the EU, there are 24 official languages, but also more than 60 regional languages and minority languages are recognized, and we need to provide for that. So it is crucial, and companies get more and more afraid that they can't deliver. So this has implications for the whole world. If a company from Japan or from China wants to deliver goods in the EU, they absolutely have to comply with these European standards. So they really have to provide guidelines and all the information in the local language. And this is huge business. So in my research, I've proved very often already that we need good translators and interpreters, and we need that all languages are considered equal. So the question, I was in a panel in a conference last week, and there the question was raised, what is a minority language? Why do we talk about minorities? It is a language as such. And so it has to be recognized as such. So now what I focused upon in this short presentation for today was on the multilingualism that is important for companies to trade and to do business. But I have plenty of other examples, and Conrad knows this in my book, especially, for example, on what was said before by another speaker about the medical system and how everything goes wrong if local and personal languages are not respected. So it is a very important question indeed.
Yes, no, thank you very, very much for that. And especially highlighting the issue of, people feel safer, the issue of safety, and somebody is more than able and willing to engage you, from a business point of view, socially, when you speak their language. So thank you for that. And just moving to some of our audience members, there is a wonderful point that Patience Onowode makes, that Multilingualism is really the way forward in all spheres of life, be it in education or business, communication. Thank you to all the speakers and for the organizers for putting together a knowledge-packed webinar such as this. I just want to also pick up on Ntjantja Ned. You were making a similar point, I think, to Prof. Steurs about the issue of safety, albeit in a different context in education. So can you just maybe expand, Ntjantja Ned, just around, students feeling safe in a classroom and the importance of educators actually being culturally and linguistically empowered and powerful in order to make students feel safe in the classroom so that they can be their best. So if I could ask you, please, Ntjantja Ned, to unmute and to come on board and to just expand on that, please, on that point of, in a multilingual classroom, how that assists students to really be their best and to do their best in a classroom.
Thank you, Nokuthula. I wanted to close my recorded thing with 2 points. That I actually approached this topic from a social justice thing, social justice aspect. And I think Professor Dr. Conrad did mention that it's a social cohesion and all those kinds of things. It really is a justice thing in South Africa. The second thing is actually, it's an enabling thing. And if you want to disempower somebody, take away the language and get them to relate to you in something that's foreign.
Yeah.
And I don't know how it works with other people. I think in Sotho, I dream in Sotho, I do this kind. So I'm talking to you right now, I think in Sotho and then translate it in English. That's a heavy load. And if from your quotation that Madiba said, you want to get to talk to somebody, talk to that person to their heart. As a public servant, my examples were more from a public servant point of view. If I'm serving you, I'm obliged to speak your language in order to serve you properly. I think in this country, public service must do that. You don't take me out of my language and you out of your language, and we both communicate in a foreign language. Yeah. And we miss each other in this thing. So I'm actually just saying, you feel safe, you feel acknowledged, you feel you belong. Yeah. If at least on your first day, you are acknowledged, especially if you are a child, you don't know any other language, no other sounds that you have in your ears, other than your mother tongue's language. That is an environment that is enabling a child to thrive. And I
like how, Minette, you really step in and fill the gap in terms of early childhood development, because those are the people who will be doing business in future. Yes, we want to grow the economy, but let's start earlier. And I love also how Kieran from Pendoring has said research is being done locally on the potential of export products inspired by our indigenous languages and culture. Shoma Jozi, Matosa strike me as global successes, but so much more seems to be possible. Language must become a contributor to unlocking better futures for South Africans. So Kieran, I love that example of using Matosa, Shoma Jozi, and of course there are countless examples, Black Coffee, who are really proudly South African exports, who are, in their languages and cultures are really engaging. I'd like now to go to Conrad. I see that Conrad Steenkamp, your hand was up. I'd like to hand over to say a few words, please.
Yes, it's just a comment that there are parallels here with business and the environment, where for quite some time there was a strong emphasis on compliance. We must comply with the laws. But then some companies started making a strategic shift, and they said, instead of just complying with the laws, why don't we monitor the landscape to see about coming legislation, so that by the time the legislation comes, we're not surprised. We know exactly what's going on. It's similar here to a company sitting in the EU who didn't watch the legislative landscape, and suddenly they've got to comply with these linguistic requirements, and they are at a disadvantage with respect to all other companies that are actually went and did the trouble of looking at these things ahead of time strategically. So I think companies need to shift their perspective here. First, it is good business. There's no doubt about it, reaching your customers, and it's fantastic that Eben managed to get this in that you can get credits for this now with the marketing. I forget now their name, the Marketing Association of South Africa. But if you participate in this, you get a credit. Fantastic. But the next thing would be for companies to start looking at audits. Linguistic audits. How do you go ahead? How do you move forward in a strategic way? The very first thing is to do a language audit of your company, so that you know internally what are your language needs, to externally what are your language needs externally. Then you can come up with a plan. And unfortunately, you have to bring in the experts here. You have to bring linguists on board so that they can help you with this. Thanks.
And of course, I mean, you're talking about bringing linguists on board, translators and so on. And that again talks to the employment opportunities and so on. I'd really like, before we close, I just wanted if Enver, Groenewald, and then straight after, Eben, I'm going to try and twist your arm here because I think you're both, have some experience in advertising. If I could just, the South African advertising community is doing so just amazing work. I mean, South African adverts are just the best. So I don't know if, Enver, I could twist your arm to just give us maybe some closing remarks from your side, as well as Eben Kuhn to just come and give us some remarks about the strides made by the advertising community.
Thank you very much, Nokuthula. Yeah, I think for a long time in South Africa, there was this offensive notion that South Africans who didn't speak English or Afrikaans, and those weren't their first languages, preferred to be communicated with through advertising in English specifically, because somehow that spoke to the aspirations of non-first language English speakers, which I think was palpably quite racist, number one, very offensive, and very convenient for both companies and advertisers to not invest in authenticity. I'm really excited by the fact that over the last few years, we've seen a significant shift on the part of companies and their advertising agencies to communicate with South Africans in their first language, which promotes authenticity, which promotes relevance, and which I think promotes a fundamental respect for the consumer, which I think for a long time may have been lacking. I think there's been a relationship between companies, brands, and consumers that's been at arm's length. It's been transactional. The only relationship has to do with how much of our product can we get people to buy. And I think with the global shift in business to be part of society rather than separated and only transacting with consumers, I think that this shift is becoming more and more pronounced. And I think it can only bode very well for South African business and for the advertising industry as we embrace this respect, authenticity for language diversity within the country.
I love that, relevance and respect. Eben Kian, can I just, as a representative of Pendoring, just call on you? You made those beautiful examples, with Boshoma Josie and Matosa, going global. Before our closing remarks from Professor Kashula, can I just twist your arm, please, to come online and just maybe share some more examples? I mean, as the Pendoring Awards, I'm sure you are privy to a great many works by South African advertisers and South African artists.
Thank you, Nokuthula, for that. Yeah, we're really starting to see an incredible shift, specifically in our digital categories, interestingly enough, where people are starting to deal with multilingualism in much more constructive ways. We do have this thing of, like, in the corporate world, if somebody speaks in a different language, it was always frowned upon. And that's really an outdated model. We need to find more interesting ways of dealing with multilingualism without excluding anybody. And what's interesting this year in our finalists and entries, which we're announcing the finalists on Friday this week, we're starting to see amazing shifts into the digital environment where people go beyond making adverts and starting to serve customers in other languages. And it really is a very interesting thing. I don't want to give away who our winners are going to be, so we are going to be announcing that later this week, the finalists, and then on the 4th of November, the actual winners. But our overall winner this year is one of the best examples, and I can't share it with you just yet, of somebody who said, let's do more. Let's use language as a resource to make a strategic difference in how we position our brand. And there really is so much possibilities, especially with a digital medium, where you can present something in one language and subtitle it in another language. So you can speak in more than one language at the same time. And that's really the crux for us, is in the next decade, which has been announced by UNESCO as the decade of indigenous languages, how do we as South Africans start using multilingualism in more constructive ways? Because if we don't understand how we use our languages, we're really overlooking our identity and one of the most important cultural assets that we have. And that's what's interesting for me in a business context. How do we unleash those resources? Thank you.
Brilliant. And I'm sorry I can't get you to reveal who the winner is, but thank you so much, Eben. And with that, thank you to everybody. Thanks to everybody watching, all the participants. Thank you to our panelists. And I'd now like to call on Professor Russell Kashula to please give us their closing remarks. Thank you. Prof, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nokuthula. Molweni bantu basekhaya. Goeiemorgen, Diabolisa, good morning. So my job is really quite a simple one. It's to summarize what's been said, and then also maybe just to leave you with some closing remarks. So, I think Mr. Ntjantja made a very important point at the beginning when he highlighted the irony of the fact that we discuss African languages and the role of African languages in English. So, that irony should not be lost on us in this forum. Although Nadine Gordimer, the late Nadine Gordimer, did refer to English as an adjunct African language, I think he also made a very important point about creating opportunities for languages to flourish. So I think we should all ask ourselves, what can we do in our environments to create opportunities for languages to flourish, in order to transform, to create transformative environments and redress issues of the past, and to see language as a strategic resource. And he alluded to the use of Sepitori, which is a variety or dialect that is spoken in Tshwane, Pretoria, and the fact that you cannot operate very well in Pretoria without understanding that, urban dialect. And I think Professor Steurs raised some really interesting points in relation to her new book, Taal is Business, or Language is Business. And she spoke about the fact that multilingualism provides a really competitive edge in business, and that it is a valuable corporate resource, and that economic expansion needs to focus on language. And she gave examples as well, the Belgian chocolate example, where ingredients, for example, have to be translated into other languages. And she raised a very interesting example from France, where 11% of 2,000 businesses admitted to having lost contracts due to a lack of multilingualism within their businesses. And what I liked about Professor Steurs' talk as well, she mentioned what we can do in business. For example, recruiting multilingual employees, offering language courses, hosting multilingual company meetings, creating multilingual intranets, and of course, websites that speak to the customers in their own languages. And the very interesting example of Caterpillar as well that was raised, where English only policy was initially pursued, and then they moved to a much more multilingual policy in order to facilitate knowledge that technicians can use in their mother tongues, whether it be Mandarin, Chinese, and so on. So for me, that was a very interesting, practical, and insightful talk. Thank you for that. And I think Mr. Enver Groenewald really spoke from the heart in relation to what happens at Ogilvy, and the whole notion of profitability through social conscience really struck me as very important. And I like the way that you put it, that it's just simply too simplistic to see English only as the language of business. It's a much more complex environment. And I think you raised the point that it may be a language that's used between businesses, but it's not the only language to reach people, to reach us on the ground, especially when it comes to advertising. And also, if you want to create a persuasive argument about a product, surely, it has to be speaking to the culture and the identity of the people on the ground. And therefore, multilingualism is absolutely integral and vitally important in the advertising industry. And I think you made that point very clear. To speak to people's identity is important. And to adapt, promote, and celebrate multilingualism within organizations. And you spoke about diversity, inclusivity. And I really found that point very interesting, that we don't look at language when we're talking about diversity. We look at other factors like gender and so on. But it struck me also that if we were to do away with affirmative action and simply use language as a barometer, or multilingualism as a barometer, we could remove the race-based kind of affirmative action and white-colored Indian type of approach that we have in South Africa, which often entrenches those apartheid categories. If we just use multilingualism, if you speak more than 2 languages, you get the job, in a certain context. So that struck me as a very good point that was being made. So your last point was that language is a vital social business investment. And that is, I think, a very good point that you left us with there. And then, Ms. Ntjantja, Ned, I just loved the way in which you brought emotion to the discussion, because language is in and of itself and an emotional connection that we have, and it gives us a connection with each other as well. And you made that point very clear through the examples that you provided us. The example of your nephew going to Grey College and not being able to understand English, and that becoming a language, a barrier to education as such, which is unforgivable, because language does not denote English does not denote one's intelligence. Language is the purveyor of knowledge, whether it be Sesotho or English. And the schooling system, I think, needs to really introspect about these issues, where, for example, there are certain schools, when you enter the gate, you are not allowed to speak your home language. You have to switch to English. In fact, it's unconstitutional. And the example about the accident as well, where, the Afrikaans-speaking people in the car, that little girl or child you could not communicate with her through her mother tongue. And there was this disconnection that happened there. And the point is taken that we live in a complex society We need to understand each other's languages if we are to reach out to each other and become a socially cohesive environment in which to live. And I found your example about the psychiatrist and the, very interesting as well. The fact that ukritikazi would have been totally misinterpreted as a sense of violence against another human being rather than the slaughtering of a goat. And it made me think also of a term like amafufunyane. How on earth do you translate that into English as a Western trained monolingual psychiatrist? There is just no equivalence. So we need to do a lot of work in those fields of health and medicine to make people aware of what is going on. Can I carry on, Nokuthula, just for another minute?
I think maybe for another half a minute, because we are a bit over our time, but thank you.
I will just make the following point that Webb is of the opinion that languages can facilitate or hinder economic activity in various ways. For instance, in regard to the effective distribution of information in the workplace, the productive use of workers' knowledge and the skills, the effective delivery of services to the public, and so forth. So what strikes me is that NEPAD and the NEPAD and the 2030 development goals are not provided in any African language in South Africa. They are only provided in English. And I think that needs to be addressed. And we need a bottom-up approach to language planning that's context-driven within a specific work environment, and that would be the way forward. And to expand the triple bottom line into a quadruple bottom line where culture and language give you access to greater productivity and greater economic value. So I think I'll just leave it at that. The last point I wanted to make is that a three-tier economy in South Africa is totally undesirable. And that is what we have now because of the lack of multilingualism. We have the first economy controlled by English, the second economy where some of us speak English okay and we can operate, and the third economy which excludes people who do not speak English and relegates them to become poor and indigent. And thank you to all the presenters as well. It was very interesting.
Professor Bekumandi, and the time has just flown past. And with that, I just want to say thank you to the organizers for this wonderful webinar. Thank you to Pendoring, thank you to ILAF, thank you to PanSALB, thank you to Fin24, thank you to Hollard, and of course, thank you to our wonderful panelists and everybody who joined us this morning. I think the points were rich, the points were many, and what an important topic that we've covered, language as a strategic resource. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.